At a distance of less than 3,000 feet from below the summit of Mount Ryder, you may find tributaries of the San Joaquin and Owens rivers, bursting forth from the ice and snow of the glaciers that flowed its flanks. While a little to the north of here are found to the highest affluents of the Tuolumne and Merced. Thus, the fountains of four of the principal rivers of California are within a radius of 4 or 5 miles. Lakes are seen as gleaming in all sorts of places, round or oval or square like very mirrors. Others, often narrow and sinuous, drawn close around the peaks like silver zones. The highest reflecting only rocks, snow, and the sky. But neither these nor the glaciers, nor the bits of brown meadow and moorland that occur here and there are large enough to make any marked impression upon the mighty wilderness of mountains. The high rejoicing in its freedom roves about the vast expanse, yet returns again and again to the fountain peaks. Perhaps some of one of the multitude excites special attention. Some gigantic castle with turrets and battlements, or some Gothic cathedral more abundantly inspired than Milan's. But generally, when looking for the first time from an all-embracing standpoint like this, the inexperienced observer is oppressed by the incomprehensible grandeur, variety, and abundance of the mountains rising shoulder to shoulder beyond the reach of the vision. And it is only after they have been studied by one long, lovingly subordinate are quickly perceived at the most complicated clusters of peaks stand revealed, harmoniously correlated and fashioned like works of art, eloquent monuments of the ancient ice rivers that brought them into relief from the general mass of the range. The canyons, too, some of them a mile deep, mazing wildly through the mighty host of the mountains, however lawless and ungovernable at first sight they appear, are at length recognized as the necessary effects of causes which followed each other in harmonious sequence. Nature's poems carved on tables of stone, the simplest and most emphatic of her glacial compositions. Could we have been here to observe during this glacial period, we should have overlooked a wrinkled ocean of ice as continuous as that now covering the landscapes of Greenland, filling every valley and canyon with only the tops of the fountain peaks rising darkly above the rock-encumbered ice waves like islets in a stormy sea. Those islets only hints of the glorious landscape now smiling in the sun. Standing here in the deep, brooding silence, all the wilderness seemed motionless as if the works of creation done, but in the midst of outer steadiness, we know there is incessant motion and change, ever and anon. Avalanches are falling from yonder peaks. These cliff-bound glaciers, seemingly wedged and immovable, are flowing like water and grinding against the rocks beneath them. The lakes are lapping their granite shores and wearing them away, and every one of these rills and young rivers is fretting the music and air into music and carrying the mountains to the plains. Here are the roots of all the life of the valleys, and here, more simply than elsewhere in the eternal flux of nature manifested, ice changing to water, lakes to meadows, and mountains to plains. And while we thus contemplate nature's methods of landscape creation and reading the records as she carved on her rocks, reconstruct, however impatiently, the landscapes of the past, we also learn that there, as we now behold, have succeeded of those of the pre-glacial age. So they in turn are withering and vanishing to be succeeded by others yet unborn. But in the midst of these fine lessons and landscapes, I had to remember that the sun was wheeling from far to west, while a new way down the mountain had to be discovered to some point on the timberline where I could have a fire, for I could not even burden myself with a coat. I first scanned the western spurs, hoping some might appear through which I may reach the northern glacier and cross its snout, or pass around the lakes into which it flows, and thus strike my morning track. This route was soon sufficiently unfolded to show that, if practicable at all, it would require so much time that reaching camp that night would be out of the question. I therefore scrambled back eastward, descending the southern slopes obliquely at the same time. Here the hags seemed less formidable, and the head of the glacier that flows northeast came in sight, which I determined to follow as far as possible, hoping thus to make my way to the front of the peak on the east side, and thence across the intervening canyons and ridges to camp. The inclinations of the glacier is quite moderate at the head, and as the sun had softened the névé, I made myself in rapid progress, running and sliding and keeping up a sharp outlook for crevices. About half a mile from the head, there is an ice cascade where the glaciers pour over a sharp declivity and is shattered into massive blocks separated by deep blue fissures. To thread my way through the spinnery masses of the crevassed portion seemed impossible, and I endeavored to avoid it by climbing off the shoulder of the mountain, but the slopes rapidly steepened and at length fell away into sheer precipices, compelling a return to the ice. Fortunately, the day had been warm enough to loosen the ice crystals so as to admit the hollows being dug and the rotten portions of the blocks, thus enabling me to pick my way with far less difficulty than I anticipated. Continuing down over the snout and along the left lateral moraine was only a confident saunter, showing that the ascent of the mountain by way of this glacier is easy, provided one is armed with an axe to cut steps here and there. The lower end of the glacier was beautifully waxed and barred by the outcropping edges of the bedded ice layers, which represent the annual snowfall, and to some extent the irregularities of the structure caused by the weathering of the walls of crevasses, and by separate snowfalls which had been followed by rain, hail, thawing and freezing, etc. Small rills were gliding and swirling over the melting surface with a smooth, oily appearance, and channels of pure ice, their quick, compliant movements contrasting most impressively with the rigid, invisible flow of the glacier itself, on whose back they were all riding. Night drew near before I could reach the eastern base of the mountain, and my camp lay many a rugged mile to the north, but ultimate success was assured. It was now only a matter of endurance and ordinary mountain craft. The sunset was, if possible, yet more beautiful than that of the day before. The model landscape seemed to be fairly saturated with warm purple light. The peaks marshaled along the summit were in shadow, but though every notch and pass streamed vivid sun fire, soothing and irradiating their rough black angles, while companies of small luminous clouds hovered above them like angels of light. Darkness came on, but I found my way by the trends of the canyon and the peaks projected against the sky. All excitement died with the light, and then I was weary. But the joyful sound of the waterfall across the lake was heard at last, and soon the stars were seen reflected in the lake itself. Taking my bearing from these, I discovered the little pine thicket in which my nest was, and then I had a rest such as only a tired mountaineer can enjoy. After lying loose and lost for a while, I made a sunrise fire, went down to the lake, dashed water on my head, and dipped a cupful for the tea. The revival brought about bread and tea was as complete as the exhaustion from excessive enjoyment and toil. Then I crept beneath the pine tassels to bed. The wind was frosty and the fire burned low, but my sleep was none the less sound, and the evening constellations had swept far to the west before I had woke. After thawing and resting in the morning sunshine, I sauntered home, that is, back to the Tualatin camp, bearing away toward a cluster of peaks that hold the fountain snows of one of the north tributaries in Rush Creek. Here I discovered a group of beautiful glacier lakes, nestled together in a grand amphitheater. Toward evening, I crossed the divide, but separating the Mono waters from those of the Tuolumne, and entered the glacier basin that now holds the fountain snows of the stream that forms the upper Tuolumne Cascades. This stream I traced down through its many dwells in gorges, meadows, and bogs, reaching the brink of the main Tuolumne at dusk. A loud whoop for the artist was answered again and again. Their campfire came in sight, and half an hour afterward I was with them. They seemed unreasonably glad to see me. I had been absent for only 3 days. Nevertheless, though the weather was fine, they had already been weighing chances as to whether I would ever return, and trying to decide whether they should wait longer or begin to seek their way back to the lowlands. Now their curious troubles were over. They packed their previous sketches, and next morning we set out homeward bound, and in 2 days entered the Yosemite Valley from the north by way of Indian Canyon.